In the bustling city of Lagos, where traditions and modernity often collided, Mr. Winnie lived a life many envied. Handsome, wealthy, and charming, Winnie was the kind of man who turned heads wherever he went. He lived in a sprawling bungalow in Ikeja, with walls painted in bright yellow and a compound large enough to host a small football match. Despite his success, Winnie carried a heavy loneliness in his heart, having grown up in an orphanage with no family to call his own. His solace came from the women who flocked to him, and his house was rarely without a guest. Ivana, a 22-year-old maid from a small village in Enugu, had worked for Winnie for nearly 2 years. She was a quiet girl with striking ebony skin, big almond-shaped eyes, and a kind smile. Life had been hard for her, and coming to Lagos to work was her family's last hope for survival. She sent most of her earnings back home to support her mother and younger siblings. From the moment she stepped into Winnie's house, Ivana's heart had stirred. Her boss's confidence and charm captivated her, and over time, her admiration blossomed into a full-blown crush. She would often find herself stealing glances at him, her heart racing whenever he spoke to her. But Winnie only saw her as a maid and nothing more. His evenings were spent in the company of glamorous women, and his mornings were reserved for business meetings and phone calls. Every night, Winnie returned home with a different woman. His laughter echoed through the house, followed by muffled conversations and the creaking of his bed. Ivana, lying on her thin mattress in her small servant's quarters, tried to block out the sounds, but her heart ached with jealousy and longing. She dreamed of being the one to make him laugh and share his bed. Each morning, Winnie would casually instruct Ivana to clean up his room. It was a routine she had come to dread. The used condoms she found on the bed, in the bin, and sometimes even on the wardrobe were reminders of his unattainable life. But it also fed a simmering plan in her heart, a plan that would change her life forever. It was an ordinary evening in Lagos, with the sound of generators humming in the background and the aroma of suya wafting through the streets. Winnie had brought home yet another woman. Ivana, as always, served them dinner with a forced smile and retired to her quarters. The night passed as usual, with laughter and muffled sounds from the master bedroom. The next morning, Ivana entered Winnie's room to clean. The scent of perfume and alcohol lingered in the air. Her eyes fell on the crumpled sheets and the discarded condom in the bin. As she picked it up, her hand froze. A wild idea, one she had toyed with for weeks, suddenly took root in her mind. For months, Ivana had been harboring a deep desire to change her destiny. She had always felt invisible to Winnie, despite working so closely with him. Her nights were filled with dreams of being by his side, of being more than just a maid. Yet every morning reminded her of the gap between them. The sight of glamorous women leaving his house, their confident strides and expensive perfumes, only deepened her longing. Ivana's curiosity about motherhood had grown during her conversations with other maids in the neighborhood. A child can change everything, one of them had said. Even the coldest of men soften when they see their own blood. Those words stayed with her, feeding a risky idea. Over the weeks, she had secretly researched on her small, second-hand phone, piecing together information about conception and fertility. Her plan was bold and dangerous, but her determination outweighed her fear. She told herself that this was her only chance to be noticed, to be loved. Carefully, Ivana retrieved the condom from the bin, her hands shaking as she handled it. She locked the door to her small quarters and sat on her bed, staring at it. A part of her hesitated, the voice of reason warning her of the consequences. But another part, driven by desperation and love, silenced those doubts. "This is for us," she whispered to herself, imagining a life where she and Winnie were together, raising a family. "This will make him see me." Following the instructions she had memorized from online articles and whispered advice from older women, Ivana carefully carried out her plan. The process felt surreal, her heart pounding with every step. When she was done, she sat still for a moment, clutching her stomach as if willing her body to accept the life she hoped to create. That night, Ivana couldn't sleep. Doubts and fears plagued her mind. What if it didn't work? What if Winnie found out and sent her away? But beneath the fear was a glimmer of hope, a vision of a future where she was no longer just the maid but something more. The days that followed were filled with anticipation. Ivana went about her duties as usual, but her heart leapt at every small change in her body. She prayed fervently, her faith becoming her anchor. She avoided the other maids, afraid that they might notice her distraction and suspect something. Weeks turned into months, and Ivana began to notice the signs. Morning nausea, unusual cravings, and the faint swell of her belly confirmed what she had hoped for. She was pregnant. Her emotions were a mix of joy and fear. The next step would be the hardest, telling Winnie the truth. 3 months passed. Ivana's body began to change in ways she couldn't ignore. At first, it was subtle, a wave of nausea in the mornings, an inexplicable craving for roasted corn and ogba. Her appetite grew, and so did her anxiety. As the days turned into weeks, her once flat stomach developed a noticeable curve, a physical testament to the life growing inside her. The changes weren't just physical. Ivana's emotions swung like a pendulum. There were moments of joy when she imagined holding her baby, a part of Winnie and herself united. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by an overwhelming fear. How would Winnie react? Would he cast her out, humiliate her, or worse, deny the child? Each night, Ivana lay on her small bed, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming silently as she battled these thoughts. Her symptoms didn't go unnoticed. The cook, Mom Nkechi, had a keen eye for such things. "Ivana," she said one afternoon, her tone half joking, "are you hiding something? You've been glowing lately. And that appetite of yours, eh? It's like you're eating for two." Ivana forced a laugh and shook her head. "I'm just trying to keep up with the work," she replied, avoiding eye contact. But inside, her heart raced. She knew that Mom Nkechi's suspicions were the first step toward the staff gossiping. She had to tell Winnie before the news spread. The weight of her secret grew heavier with each passing day. She rehearsed her confession in front of the mirror, trying to find the right words, the right tone. Should she plead? Should she be firm? Every scenario ended the same way in her mind, with Winnie's anger and rejection. But she had no choice. The truth could no longer be hidden. One evening, after Winnie returned home, Ivana decided it was time. She waited until he had settled in the living room, the faint hum of the television filling the space. Her palms were sweaty, and her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to walk forward. She stood near the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. "Sir, I need to talk to you," she began, her voice trembling. Winnie looked up, surprised by her boldness. "What is it, Ivana? Is everything okay?" Ivana swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "Sir, I'm pregnant," she blurted out, tears streaming down her face. "And the child is yours." Winnie's jaw dropped. He stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about? That's not possible. We've never..." Ivana interrupted, her words stumbling out in a desperate rush. She explained how she had used the condom from his room, her voice breaking with emotion. She spoke of her feelings for him, her longing, and her misguided belief that this was the only way to connect their lives. Her confession left Winnie speechless. Anger and disbelief flashed across his face. "Ivana, do you realize what you've done? This is insane," he exclaimed, standing up and pacing the room. But as he processed her words, memories of his own childhood crept in. He had always longed for a family, for someone to call his own. Though he was furious at Ivana's deceit, the thought of a child stirred something deep within him. Winnie sat back down, his head in his hands. His mind raced with conflicting emotions. Why, Ivana? Why would you do this? He asked, his voice softer now. Tears streamed down her face as she replied, because I love you, sir. I know I shouldn't have, but I didn't know any other way. You have no idea what it's like to feel invisible. Her words struck a chord. Winnie had spent his entire life feeling invisible in a different way, as an orphan, overlooked and unwanted. For a moment, their pain felt interconnected, even if their circumstances were worlds apart. He looked at Ivana, seeing her not just as a maid but as a young woman with hopes, dreams, and flaws. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation hanging heavily between them. Winnie's anger simmered, but his heart wrestled with a growing sense of responsibility. He took a deep breath, knowing that his life had just changed forever. The weeks that followed were tense. Winnie avoided Ivana, but he couldn't avoid his thoughts. He sought advice from his close friend, Chuka, who listened intently and said, Winnie, you've always wanted a family. Maybe this is God's way of giving you one. Winnie spent sleepless nights thinking about his past. Growing up in an orphanage had been a lonely experience. He had vowed to never let his future children endure the same. Slowly, his anger began to fade, replaced by a sense of responsibility. One evening, Winnie called Ivana to the living room. Ivana, what you did was wrong, he said sternly. But I can't deny that this child is mine. I won't abandon my own flesh and blood. Ivana's heart soared. Thank you, sir, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. In a small, private ceremony, Winnie and Ivana got married. It was not the grand wedding Ivana had dreamed of, but it was enough to make her happy. The neighbors gossiped about the union, but Winnie paid them no mind. As the months passed, Winnie began to see a different side of Ivana. She was kind, hardworking, and dedicated. Their relationship grew stronger, and when their baby boy was born, Winnie held him with tears in his eyes. The boy was named Chukwemeka, meaning God has done well. For the first time in years, Winnie felt complete. He had a family of his own, and though their journey had started in an unconventional way, it had led to happiness. Ivana, too, found peace. She was no longer just a maid, she was a wife and a mother. Her dreams had come true, and she vowed to cherish her new life and the family she had created.